White Lexus screeched to a halt. The door flung open and out marched Karen Sanderson, the HOA president in her signature blazer and pearl necklace, flanked by 2 board members like some unholy suburban tribunal. Without warning, she stormed up, pointed at my kids, and in front of the entire street, barked. Those children are not registered with the HOA. They're not legally yours, and they are not allowed in this community. Before I could even process her words, 2 private security goons hired by the HOA grabbed my girls and shoved them into the back of that Lexus. My blood ran cold. My instincts kicked in. But Karen had no idea what kind of man she was messing with. I never asked for war with the HOA. Truth is, I'd lived in Cedar Springs for 6 peaceful years before I even knew what the board looked like. My house was a modest brick home sitting at the edge of the neighborhood, close to the county line, backed by open fields and thick woods. It was the kind of place you bought to get away from city noise, to drink your coffee in silence and watch the sunrise while your kids drew chalk art on the driveway. That was my routine. My daughters, Lucy and Rose, twins, age 9, were my whole world. They played barefoot in the yard, picked dandelions, and left their stuffed animals under the porch swing. I had built that house with my own 2 hands after retiring from active duty and taking the job as county sheriff. It wasn't much, but it was honest, and it was ours. Back then, I only had a vague idea of the HOA's existence. A couple of newsletters, some notices about lawn care, and an annual fee I paid just to keep the peace. I didn't attend meetings. I didn't have time for neighborhood politics. I was busy keeping the actual law in order, protecting the people of this county. I didn't think I had to protect my kids from my own neighbors. The first sign something was off came in the form of a letter. A friendly courtesy notice slid under my door, sealed with a little gold-embossed HOA logo, informing me that the American flag I had raised on a 20-foot pole violated vertical display height limits for the community. I laughed. I figured it was a one-off thing. I replied with a photo of my military ID, a polite thank you for your concern, and a copy of the U.S. flag code. Thought that would be the end of it. But then came the next notice, this time about the barbecue grill I kept out back. Visible from the street, they said. Even though it was behind a privacy fence and hadn't moved in 4 years. Then it was the length of my grass. Then the number of toys left in the front yard. Then the chalk drawings on the sidewalk. One by one, they started piling on, nitpicking my life. I kept dismissing it as overzealous rule enforcement. I wasn't looking for a fight. But my wife, God rest her soul, she would have known better. She always had a nose for the kind of people who smiled in your face while planning to stab you in the back. That's exactly who Karen Sanderson was. Karen introduced herself to me in person a few weeks after the flag notice. She came marching down the sidewalk with a clipboard in hand and a smile so fake it made my teeth itch. She wore pastel sweaters even in July, and had that kind of voice that always sounded like it was about to scold someone. "Sheriff," she said with a tone that oozed forced politeness. "I'm Karen Sanderson, president of the Cedar Springs Homeowners Association. I just wanted to formally welcome you to the community." I didn't bother telling her I'd been here longer than she had. I just nodded, extended a hand. She didn't shake it. "We've noticed some irregularities around your property," she continued. "Children's toys left outside, your grass growing past the acceptable length, and the flagpole, well, we've covered that. It's about appearances, you understand. We all have to do our part." I told her I understood, thanked her for stopping by, and sent her on her way. But something in her eyes unsettled me. She didn't look at me like I was a neighbor. She looked at me like I was an invader. Problem to be solved. Things got weird after that. The notices turned into threats. Fines. Demands. Then came the HOA meetings. I never attended them, but suddenly I was being accused of non-compliance. With Karen quoting obscure rules that I'd never agreed to, I requested copies of the HOA charter and bylaws. What I received was a barely legible packet of scanned documents from 1998, filled with handwritten annotations and stamps from defunct property developers. It was a legal mess, but I could already see what was happening. Karen had made me her project. I'd seen her kind before, people who crave control but lack the credentials. So they create fiefdoms where they can dictate the color of someone's shutters and feel like royalty. And now she was targeting me and, worse, my children. I tried to play it cool. I figured it was all bluster. After all, I'm the sheriff. Literally. She could whine all she wanted, but she didn't have any real authority. But Karen didn't want real authority. She wanted obedience. The more I ignored her, the more emboldened she got. One morning, I caught her standing on my lawn, snapping photos of Lucy and Rose playing on the trampoline. When I stepped outside, she pretended to be photographing a bird. Just admiring the scenery, she chirped. I warned her, politely but firmly, told her to stay off my property. The next day, another notice came: unauthorized recreational equipment in yard. A week later, someone filed a noise complaint about children screaming. They were just laughing. That's when I started to realize this wasn't about rules anymore. It was about my kids. I installed cameras, moved the trampoline to the backyard, stopped letting the girls play out front without me watching, killed me inside. I was turning my home into a bunker, all because some bored suburban tyrant had decided my family didn't fit the community aesthetic. The straw that broke me was the school call. The principal phoned me and said someone claiming to be from the HOA had inquired about my daughter's enrollment status, asked for documentation, claimed there were concerns about their guardianship. I nearly crushed my phone in my hand. When I demanded to know who made the call, I didn't get a name. But I knew. Karen was trying to build a case. Against me. Against my own family. I'd seen people like her before. People who weaponized policy, bureaucracy, and fake authority to destroy others. I was dealing with a full-blown control freak who believed the HOA charter gave her power over blood and kin. And she was getting bolder. I sat my daughters down that night and explained that they shouldn't speak to Miss Karen or anyone from the HOA unless I was present. They didn't understand, not fully, but they nodded. They trusted me, and that made me more determined than ever to protect them. I went back through every HOA document I'd ever received, every email, every fine, every courtesy notice. I built a binder thicker than a law textbook. I started documenting everything. Karen thought I was passive, that I was going to keep brushing it off. She didn't know what I really was, that I had interrogated murder suspects with less patience than I was showing her, that I had brought down meth rings with less paperwork than what I was now collecting on her. I hadn't retaliated yet, but I was getting ready. Meanwhile, the neighborhood had begun whispering. Some sided with Karen, some with me, but most stayed quiet, fearful. She ruled through passive aggression, using the HOA like a cudgel to keep everyone in line. But my girls, they were innocent, and now she was making them a target. That's when I realized this wasn't going to end with a polite conversation or a sternly worded letter. No. Karen had crossed into territory she didn't understand. She had declared war on the wrong man. I didn't start this conflict, but when she came for my family, she lit the fuse. And she had no idea how big the explosion would be. I wish I could say Karen came to her senses after I started pushing back. But no. She escalated. And she escalated hard. The way she strutted around the neighborhood like a monarch inspecting her kingdom, clipboard in hand and that tight, smug smile on her lips, you'd think she had been elected to Congress, not appointed head of a homeowners association. But this wasn't about bylaws anymore. Somewhere along the way, her vendetta against me shifted from annoying to obsessive. It wasn't just my grass or my grill or my flagpole anymore. It was my family, specifically my daughters. She wanted them gone. And when she realized she couldn't scare me off with fines or compliance letters, she moved on to something far more sinister, questioning whether my girls were legally allowed to be here at all. It started with rumors, quiet ones at first. I'd hear whispers at the supermarket, glances exchanged at the neighborhood park. A mother who used to greet me at school drop-off now avoided eye contact. I asked my neighbor Alan what was going on, and after some hesitation, he let it slip. Karen had been spreading lies, that my girls weren't really my daughters, that they were from a custodial situation that hadn't been properly vetted by community authorities. She even floated the disgusting suggestion that they were wards of the state, placed in my home through a loophole. It was pure fiction, but dangerous fiction. Karen wasn't just making enemies. She was building a case, or at least the illusion of one, counting on ignorance and gossip to do the heavy lifting. Then came the meeting. I hadn't planned to attend, but something told me I should. So I showed up, plain clothes, arms crossed, and stood quietly at the back of the Cedar Springs Community Hall while Karen held court up front. She was in rare form that night, clicking through a PowerPoint filled with charts, community health assessments, and photos of homes with aesthetic deficiencies. I wasn't surprised when mine came up, a shot of my flagpole, my grill, even my truck parked on the street. Then came the kicker. She changed the slide and up popped an image of my daughters playing hopscotch in the front driveway. My fists clenched. Karen's voice didn't waver. "We've received multiple concerns regarding unregistered minors residing in the neighborhood," she said sweetly, as if she wasn't standing in front of 30 people accusing a father of harboring unknown children. "It's important that all residents comply with community occupancy standards." I interrupted her, loud and clear. "You want to say something about my daughters, you say it to me, not behind a slide." The room fell silent. She blinked, smiled that snake smile, and said, "Well, if everything is in order, there's no need for alarm, is there?" That night, I went straight to the county records office and requested every HOA filing Karen had submitted in the last year. Half of them were nonsense. The other half were downright fraudulent. She had drafted internal memos declaring new verification protocols for residency, and had even formed a subcommittee of herself and 2 hand-picked board members to investigate what she called non-verified domestic arrangements. I found emails where she discussed the sheriff's suspicious household makeup and questioned whether his children are documented dependents. She was using the HOA as her personal tool to target me. And when I checked with the local elementary school, I learned she had called not once, but 3 times, attempting to verify my daughter's birth certificates. That's when I stopped documenting and started investigating. She wasn't being nosy anymore. She was being criminal. I reached out to a friend at Child Protective Services, explained the situation, showed him the emails. He looked at me like I had just described a cult leader. "She did what?" he asked. "That's impersonation of an agency official, if she even hinted at representing anything more than an HOA. It was worse than I thought. Karen had been telling people she was in contact with county oversight regarding my family, but there were no such reports on file. She'd made them up. Worse still, she'd convinced other board members that they were legally obligated to report suspicious family units, a term I had never heard outside of dystopian novels. My friend offered to launch an internal inquiry. I told him to hold off. Not yet. I had something else in mind. Meanwhile, Karen kept pressing. One morning, I found a notice taped to my mailbox, an actual printed eviction advisory, citing a fabricated clause about community-approved occupancy standards. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. Eviction? In a neighborhood where I owned the damn house? She was unhinged. But this was no longer funny. I noticed my daughters were getting quieter. They didn't want to play in the front yard anymore. They asked why the neighbors were staring. One night, Lucy asked if they were in trouble for living here. That did it. That broke something in me. Karen had crossed every line. It wasn't about regulations. It wasn't about rules. This was psychological warfare, and my daughters were the casualties. So I leaned in. I stopped responding. Let her think I was ignoring her. I started attending HOA meetings not to fight but to watch. I recorded everything. When she held her special session on community verification, I was there with a lapel mic and 2 backup recorders. When she claimed the HOA had the right to perform wellness inspections on homes, I filmed it. When she passed out fake forms requesting social security numbers for verification purposes, I collected them. And when one of the board members approached me after a meeting, clearly shaken, and whispered, "I think she's going too far," I knew I had my inside source. His name was Glenn. He was a retired accountant, quiet, respectful, not someone you'd expect to rebel. But Karen had crossed him too. She fined his wife $100 for hanging wind chimes that caused excessive noise. He was furious but too polite to protest, until she started suggesting that his daughter-in-law's mixed-race grandchildren may not be verifiable. That's when he turned. Glenn gave me access to internal messages, secret meeting minutes, and the HOA's finances. What I saw made my blood run cold. Karen had created a slush fund, misappropriated dues for community enforcement operations, which included hiring private security, unlicensed, untrained, and operating under the label Neighborhood Compliance Task Force. She had spent over $4,000 of HOA money to build what was essentially a rogue enforcement squad. At this point, I knew what was coming. Karen had built her own army, her own rules, her own twisted vision of suburbia, and my girls were at the center of her delusion. She wasn't going to stop. She thought the HOA gave her power over bloodlines, and she had no idea I was 2 steps ahead of her the entire time. She still thought I was just a homeowner, just a stubborn father refusing to follow her little rules. She didn't know that I was also preparing a criminal dossier with over 50 pages of documented infractions, financial fraud, and impersonation. She didn't know that my friend at CPS was preparing to serve her with an inquiry. She didn't know that I had already coordinated with the county prosecutor to explore criminal charges. She didn't know that I was a sheriff who had seen cartels fall for less. Karen thought she had all the power. She thought she was about to corner me, make a public move that would humiliate me and force me to kneel. But she didn't realize something very important. When people like her make the rules, the only way to win is to let them think they're winning. Let them go too far. Let them commit the final, fatal mistake. And I had a feeling she was just one move away. One bold, illegal, spectacularly stupid move. I just had to wait, watch, and be ready when the moment came. Because Karen had made it personal. And she was about to learn the hard way. When you come for a man's children, you don't just break the rules. You break the law. And the law always answers. It was a Sunday. The kind of Sunday that makes you forget there's such a thing as stress. The girls were out front drawing flowers and cats and lopsided stick figures on the sidewalk with chalk, giggling and comparing colors. I was on the porch, coffee in hand, enjoying the kind of peace that felt sacred. Birds chirped. The breeze was warm. The world, for one blessed moment, was still. And then I heard the tires. A hard stop. Screeching rubber on pavement. My head turned before my body did, eyes narrowing. A white Lexus. Karen. She was out of the car before the dust even settled, heels clacking against the pavement like war drums. And this time she wasn't alone. Behind her, a black Suburban pulled up, windows tinted, engine still running. 2 men in khaki uniforms stepped out.
No vayas.
No agency labels. Just matching polos with the words, Neighborhood Compliance Enforcement, stitched in gold thread. I felt my stomach sink. Not out of fear, but fury. I already knew what was about to happen. I just didn't think she'd have the audacity to do it in broad daylight. Karen marched up to my daughters like she was a prison warden performing a roll call. Lucy looked up from her drawing, confused. Rose froze mid-hop. You too, Karen barked. Need to come with us. You're not registered to live here. My mug hit the ground. It didn't shatter, didn't even bounce. I was already moving. Fast. Voice booming. Get away from my kids. But the 2 men stepped in between us, hands out like bouncers at a nightclub. One of them muttered, "Sir, please remain calm. We have authorization." Authorization? My brain nearly broke at the stupidity of it. You're on private property, I growled. And those are my daughters. You touch them, and you're going to wish you'd picked a different career. But Karen wasn't backing down. She waved a clipboard in the air like it was a holy relic. They are not legally recognized occupants according to Cedar Springs HOA Policy Section 8.2. Unauthorized residents are subject to removal pending verification. She turned to her goons. Take them to the HOA Center for processing. That was the moment the men made their mistake. One of them grabbed Lucy by the arm. She screamed. Rose screamed louder. And I lost every ounce of restraint I had left. My body reacted before my badge even flashed. I shoved the first man so hard he stumbled into Karen, knocking her clipboard into the flower bed. The second one reached for his belt like he thought he had authority. I stepped forward, gun still holstered, but badge held high. "Sheriff, step back now or I swear to God, I will put you in the dirt so fast your ancestors will feel it." The guy hesitated. His partner was already backing away, hands raised. Karen screamed something about citizen's arrest. I pulled my radio from my belt. "Dispatch, this is Unit 1. I've got 2 suspects on my property attempting to abduct minors. Send backup and units to detain. Get CPS and State Patrol on the line. I want this locked down." The silence that followed was beautiful. You could hear the birds again. Lucy ran to me, crying. I picked her up. Rose clung to my leg. Karen just stood there, mouth open, eyes wide, realizing finally that she'd gone too far. Backup arrived fast. 2 patrol cars, lights spinning. Officers. I trained myself stepping out, taking one look at the scene and knowing exactly what to do. The 2 so-called compliance officers were handcuffed on the spot. Karen started screeching, calling it a misunderstanding, that she was just doing her duty, that I was overreacting. But when she saw me give the nod to Officer Ramirez to open her car and retrieve the clipboard, she went silent. She knew what was coming, and I made sure everyone watching knew it too. Neighbors had gathered by then. Phones out, whispers in the air like static. Is he arresting Karen? Did she just try to take his kids? What the hell is going on? I didn't answer any of them. I had a job to do. I handed Lucy and Rose off to a family friend, told her to keep them inside, then turned my full attention to Karen Sanderson, HOA president and now prime suspect in a criminal kidnapping investigation. I read her rights myself. Slowly, clearly. I made sure she understood every word. She sputtered, tried to argue, tried to twist the language like it was an HOA policy debate. This isn't illegal. I was protecting the neighborhood. But the cuff said otherwise. So did the look on the officer's face as he took the forged documents from her car and held them up with latex gloves. Fake court stamps, invented codes, community occupancy orders signed by her and only her. No judge, no legal standing, nothing but HOA letterhead and delusion. That night, I sat in the precinct conference room going over the evidence with the state investigator. The charges were stacking up faster than I could count. False imprisonment, impersonation of a legal authority, conspiracy to commit custodial interference, misuse of HOA funds, fraud. Oh, and let's not forget, attempted kidnapping of a law enforcement officer's children. She didn't just cross the line. She launched a full-blown invasion into federal territory. But that wasn't even the end of it. As the investigation widened, we started uncovering more. Karen's HOA wasn't just toxic. It was criminal. She had used dues to pay her compliance squad, created fake departments with fake uniforms, issued fake citations, and submitted fraudulent forms to local schools and housing departments. The board was clueless. At least half of them were just puppets nodding along because they didn't want their roses fined. But a few had helped her. And those names? I had them. Thanks to Glenn and his stash of meeting notes, emails, and financial records, we now had a blueprint of how Karen tried to build her own suburban dictatorship. I handed everything over to the DA, who agreed this wasn't just HOA harassment. This was a conspiracy. The news picked it up within a day. Local headlines lit up. Sheriff's children nearly kidnapped by HOA president. Cedar Springs Homeowners Association under criminal investigation. I didn't speak to the press. Didn't need to. The story told itself. And yet, Karen's little clique still tried to spin it. They called it a misunderstanding. Claimed I had overreacted. Said I had used my badge for revenge. But the people weren't buying it anymore. The videos were out there. The screaming kids. The fake documents. The arrests. And the worst part, for her? The moment where she realized it wasn't just a fight over property lines or lawn regulations anymore. It was a federal matter. She had tried to separate a father from his children. And I wasn't going to stop until she paid for every second of that terror. The night after it happened, I sat on the porch with Lucy asleep against my shoulder and Rose curled up under my arm. The air was quiet. No clipboard tapping down the sidewalk. No Lexus idling outside. Just the hum of cicadas and the distant rhythm of crickets. I could feel the tension in my bones easing for the first time in weeks. But I wasn't done. Karen was behind bars, sure. But this thing was bigger than her now. It wasn't just about what she did. It was about every board member who enabled her. Every rule she weaponized. Every neighbor who whispered instead of standing up. I wasn't just going to bring her down. I was going to dismantle the entire system that let her think she had the power to take what wasn't hers. And when I was finished, there wouldn't be a shred of HOA tyranny left in this neighborhood. Just freedom, and justice, and two little girls who could play hopscotch without looking over their shoulders. There's a strange quiet that comes after chaos. The kind that feels too calm, like the eye of a storm hovering before the next wave hits. That's where we were. Karen had been arrested, charged, processed, and held overnight. The community buzzed with whispers and camera flashes and gossip so thick it could be scooped with a shovel. But even as the front yards filled with folding chairs and folks exchanging second-hand updates, I knew it wasn't over. Couldn't be. A woman like Karen doesn't collapse after one blow. She schemes. She plots. She writhes beneath the surface like a snake in tall grass. And I wasn't about to let her slither back into power once the initial shock wore off. That's why I began working the case like any other major takedown, methodical, patient, surgical. I didn't want vengeance. I wanted absolute eradication. No more HOAs terrorizing families. No more tin-pot suburban tyrants pretending their neighborhood covenant gave them legal dominion over human beings. I was going to kill the monster, and that meant going for the head and the heart. The first thing I did was build a timeline. With Glenn's help, I pieced together the paper trail of Karen's HOA regime, from her first fake policy vote to the fraudulent community enforcement contracts she issued using dues money. The entire operation stunk like a bag of spoiled fish left in a hot trunk. But we needed more than stink. We needed signatures, receipts, accomplices. That's where the real gold came in. Glenn, God bless him, had been meticulous. He had saved everything. Emails, minutes, bank statements, even private messages from a group chat called HOA High Command, where Karen and her inner circle discussed strategy in all caps like they were running a covert op. One message read, "If he doesn't leave, we escalate. People respond to action, not courtesy." Another, "No one dares question us. They're sheep. I lead. Period." And my personal favorite? "If the sheriff won't comply, then we remove the problem, legally or not." That line alone gave us conspiracy intent. By Wednesday morning, I had enough to get the DA's full attention. She and I sat in her office, sipping bitter coffee while flipping through the file I'd assembled. "This is more than abuse of power," she said, eyes narrowed. "This is full-blown organized criminal activity masquerading as civic leadership." She assigned 2 investigators to the case, gave me clearance to continue gathering evidence under a formal cooperative task force. That's when it became official, Operation Paper Crown. Our goal? Take down every participant, every dollar funneled illegally, and every board member who so much as signed off on Karen's fantasy government. I deputized Glenn, not formally but with full access to resources and protection. The man had risked a lot turning on his own people. Now we were going to make sure it counted. We started flipping people. Quietly. Karen's allies weren't exactly loyal. They were scared. Once we showed them what we had, they turned faster than milk in the sun. Board secretary gave us passwords to Karen's Dropbox account, where she had stored all her fake documentation templates, HOA legal orders, removal warrants, and even child welfare assessments written in Comic Sans font, for God's sake. Another board member, a guy named Terry, confessed to forging signatures on 3 fake community votes, said Karen pressured him into it, and that he just wanted to keep the peace. The more we dug, the deeper it got. Karen had created a fake legal hotline. Just let that sink in. She made a Google Voice number, recorded herself using a British accent, and told residents to contact legal counsel through it when appealing fines. She literally LARPed as her own HOA lawyer. The woman was criminally committed. With the data mounting, we scheduled a sting. We wanted the board. All of them. And we wanted them to walk into it willingly. So we sent out an anonymous reinstatement email to the HOA board from a burner account pretending to be from Karen's attorney. It claimed she was being unfairly persecuted and would be stepping down temporarily to protect the community, but insisted a vote be held to install a new interim president. Meeting location: the HOA clubhouse. Date: Saturday, 7 p.m. Purpose: to realign and protect the legal power of the Cedar Springs HOA. We set up hidden cams, wired the room, every angle covered. I coordinated with State Patrol to have a full tactical team on standby. The DA would be watching the stream from a secure office. If they showed up and opened their mouths, we'd have them. Saturday came. The clubhouse was prepped. I waited outside in an unmarked cruiser, watching the parking lot fill with vehicles driven by cowards in khakis and summer dresses. 13 in total. All board members. All clueless. They filed in carrying clipboards, whispering like cult members about to recite an ancient ritual. One even brought wine. I watched from the monitor as they took their seats. The meeting began with the treasurer, a weasel-faced man named Ronald, who stood at the front and read Karen's statement. It was nothing short of a manifesto. Claimed she was the victim of a corrupt sheriff who was abusing his office to silence feminine leadership, that her actions were lawful under expanded neighborhood ordinances, and that compliance is the cost of community. My jaw clenched. She was still trying to pull strings even from a jail cell. But then came the good part. They started planning to reinstate the compliance task force, to reassert control over community morale, to gather names of problematic residents, starting with me. That was the moment we moved in. I gave the green light. Within seconds, tactical teams swept in. Doors kicked open, flashlights hit faces, and all 13 members were placed under arrest. Some screamed, some cried, some tried to delete files from their phones right there on the table. But it was too late. The entire thing had been recorded. And as each of them was let out in cuffs, I stepped inside, badge glinting, expression unreadable, and looked them dead in the eyes. This is what accountability looks like. That night, my house was quiet again. But it wasn't the uneasy quiet from before. It was calm, safe. The girls were asleep by 9. I stood outside on the porch, looking at the stars. The clubhouse lights were dark. The HOA was effectively shut down, pending a full audit. The DA had issued public statements. Arrests made the evening news. Karen, meanwhile, had been transferred to county lockup and denied bail. Her trial would be long and ugly. She was facing years. Her home had been seized as part of asset recovery. I heard rumors she cried when they took her pearls. I didn't care. I cared that the system she built was crumbling, that the people she terrorized were free. Neighbors began stopping by again. Not with complaints, but thanks. People I hadn't seen in months walked their dogs past my house, waving. Kids played in their front yards. One even chalked, "Thank you," on my driveway in giant rainbow letters. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the neighborhood breathe. No more fines. No more fake rules. No more Karen. Just fresh air, cut grass, and the sound of 2 little girls playing with sidewalk chalk under a golden sun. But I wasn't done yet. The final act was still to come. I hadn't had my revenge. Not fully. Not yet. Revenge, when done right, doesn't come with fireworks or shouting matches. Comes quietly, cleanly, like a switchblade sliding between the ribs. Karen thought her arrest was the end, the humiliating climax of a story she'd foolishly started. But I hadn't even started my real move yet. That mess at the clubhouse, the handcuffs, the mugshots, it was just the curtain raising. My revenge wasn't about screaming at her through steel bars or watching her cry on TV. It was about destroying everything she built, every thread of the fake empire she thought made her important, and making sure that when she walked out of prison one day, if she ever did, there would be nothing left to recognize.
No HOA.
No house. No title.
No followers.
Just ashes. And maybe, if karma was feeling generous, a for sale sign on a rundown rental in the bad part of town. I wanted her world burned down, one legal document at a time. Step 1 was turning the community against her permanently. Sure, everyone was angry now, but people forget. They rationalize. They get tired. I needed something that would leave a scar.
Something de permanent.
So I gathered every piece of evidence we had, every recording, every forged document, every fine issued under her reign, and compiled it into a neat, digestible format. I worked with a local journalist I trusted, someone who'd covered public corruption cases and didn't mind naming names. Together, we created a feature story, a full exposé. Title: The HOA That Went Rogue. I gave him access to the files. I offered on-record quotes. I let him see the footage of Karen trying to take my daughters. His hands trembled when he watched it. "You want this public?" he asked. "Every second of it," I said. The story dropped the following Sunday. It hit like a sledgehammer. Within hours, it was viral. Local news picked it up. Regional news followed. Suburban sheriff's daughters nearly taken by HOA. Fake courts and neighborhood dictatorship uncovered in Cedar Springs. The HOA was dragged into the national spotlight, and Karen's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. But I didn't stop there. I filed a civil suit on behalf of every family she'd fined, harassed, or intimidated. Over 30 neighbors joined in. Some of them broke down in my driveway, ashamed they hadn't stood up earlier, grateful for a second chance. I didn't judge them. I needed them. And together, we filed what would become one of the largest class action suits against an HOA in state history. Damages sought? $3.2 million. The basis? Emotional distress, unlawful fines, misuse of funds, and attempted parental interference. Karen's house was collateral. So was her savings. So was her pension. The court froze every asset within a week. But the piece de resistance, the kill shot, came later that month. I'd been digging through old HOA property records and stumbled on something curious. The parcel of land the HOA used for its office, the community garden, and the so-called compliance center, it wasn't legally zoned for commercial or municipal use. It was technically private land leased under a rolling contract from a defunct development company that never renewed its permits. In simpler terms, the HOA had been squatting. They had no rights to any of it. So I bought the land, quietly, under a holding company. Cash.
No fanfare.
One signature. Just like that, I owned the heart of her empire. The place where she held meetings. The office where she printed her phony citations. The garden she used for her HOA wine mixers. Mine now. The eviction notice I served the board read like a poem. Effective immediately, all property, personnel, and operations must vacate the premises. Unauthorized entry will be prosecuted. Sincerely, the owner. It was framed in gold and hand-delivered. Word spread fast. The last holdouts from Karen's cult crumbled. They packed up their filing cabinets, shredded papers like rats abandoning a sinking ship, and locked the doors for good. I showed up the next morning with a bulldozer. Had the whole structure razed within hours. In its place, a playground, swings, slides, soft mulch, and a sign at the entrance. Lucy and Rose's Freedom Park. It was clean, simple, poetic. And as the neighborhood watched their former temple of tyranny get turned into a jungle gym, I saw something better than justice. I saw healing. Karen, meanwhile, was rotting in a jail cell. She'd been denied bail a second time after violating her initial conditions by trying to call former board members from a contraband phone. The judge wasn't impressed. He extended her hold and added a potential charge for witness tampering. Her lawyer, some poor soul from a budget firm with a crumpled tie and sweaty palms, kept trying to paint her as misguided, not malicious. The court didn't buy it. Neither did the jury. When the trial finally began, the courtroom was packed. Journalists, neighbors, even former friends. I sat in the front row every day, dressed in uniform, arms folded, face unreadable. I watched her squirm. Her confidence cracked like cheap porcelain. Her voice quivered on the stand. Her former allies turned on her one by one. Glenn testified too, calm, composed, devastatingly thorough. When the jury went to deliberate, It took them just 3 hours to return with a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing was swift. 5 years prison. 2 years probation. Full financial restitution. She fainted when they read the last part, the sum total she owed to victims, legal fees, and the community. Over $1.1 million. I didn't clap. I didn't cheer. I just stood there as they led her out in cuffs. Her legacy reduced to shackles and whispers. She didn't look at me. Couldn't. Not after what she'd done. Not after what I'd done back. But the moment those courtroom doors closed behind her, I finally exhaled. For the first time in months, it was over. Cedar Springs changed after that. People stopped being afraid. Block parties returned. Kids laughed in driveways again. The playground thrived. And me? I finally got to live like I'd intended. No more cameras on the porch. No more documents stacked on the kitchen table. Just me, the girls, and our home. Safe. Free. Whole. I took a sabbatical from the force for a while. Spent my mornings packing lunches and my afternoons pushing swings. It wasn't glamorous, but it was everything. The house didn't feel like a bunker anymore. Felt like a home. Every now and then, I drive by the county jail on my way to the courthouse. I don't stop. I don't slow down. I just look. And I smile. Because somewhere inside, there's a woman in a beige jumpsuit replaying her greatest mistake over and over. Thinking about the day she thought a homeowners association gave her the power to steal a sheriff's kids. Thinking about the moment she realized she didn't just pick a fight with a neighbor. She picked a fight with the law. And she lost. Badly. So if you ever find yourself at war with an HOA, remember this. Revenge doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be final. And mine was permanent.